Hello and welcome, everybody, to Rethinking Reality Episode 3. This is the podcast where I talk about the universe and things that might make you scratch your head. Before we get started, let me adjust this camera. That's better. Almost. Hold on. Okay. Today we are looking at a book called 6-Minute X-Ray by author Chase Hughes. This is the first book that I ever read by myself. No, sorry. This is the first book I ever have chosen to read in my read in my life. So, I guess it's a little bit special in that way. I don't know how many books I've read total in my life. Not many though. I've read 5 books voluntarily in my life. This was the first one, so I found it quite interesting, and I've actually read this twice. The first time I didn't read the last section, which was the 25-week training plan. The second time I did. Maybe I did the first time, but either way, it's a good book. I think it's a very good book. I do think it's a little bit... During certain parts of the book, it sounds like Chase is really trying to sell you something, and he reiterates just how powerful the system presented in this book is. But other than that, I think it's a great book, and I do believe that there are many good pointers and invaluable information contained within this book. So what I'm going to do here is go through these 5 different points that I've written down on my computer here, and we're just going to talk about different sections of the book. I'm not going to go through every chapter. I'm just going to go through the information I find most interesting. Starting with the 2/3 rule. Okay, so Chase talks about in the book, I think it's in chapter 1 or 2, Chase talks about the myth that people often say and often believe, which is that something like 93% of communication between humans is nonverbal. Now, this isn't actually true, and I'm trying to remember how this myth was spread. But regardless, we know this isn't true because of the fact that if you were to walk into a room of people who speak a different language than you do, and you were to try to understand what they were discussing, assuming they were talking to each other, chances are you would have no idea what they're talking about. You would have no idea. You would not be able to pinpoint the topic of discussion. Now, you could probably say, okay, this guy seems really excited. This guy looks a bit angry. This person looks confused. You'd be able to read basic emotions on people, but you would not be able to tell someone, okay, this is what they're talking about. This is the subject that they're discussing, unless you spoke their language. So, if it were true that, this huge number, 93% of communication was nonverbal, well, you'd be able to understand somebody who doesn't speak the same language as you most of the time. I mean, I guess like 93% of the time, you'd be able to understand someone just through, and without talking, right? Without speaking words to them. So we know this isn't true for that reason. And Chase suggests that it's really about 2/3 of communication between humans that is nonverbal. We obviously know that not everything that we communicate is in the form of words, obviously. But it's certainly not as high as 93% of what we communicate. And so 2/3, this isn't an exact number or an exact perfect estimate, or this isn't something that you should swear by, but it's an estimate. Roughly 2/3 of roughly 2/3 of communication between human beings is nonverbal. Now, I guess I gotta go quick here because these videos take so long to upload, and last episode was way longer than the one before that, which I meant to make it shorter. So let's talk about the myth of attention span. So I find this interesting, and I've found myself thinking about this a number of times since I learned about this in his book, because there's this idea that nowadays, with all the technology that we have and all the information we have access to, our attention spans, particularly young people's attention spans, are getting shorter, right? We have the attention span of a fly. That's something people say. And this is just a myth. It's simply not true. And the reason it's not true, and this is the argument that Chase makes, this is how he explains it, is that, well, if our attention spans were super short, and if they were getting shorter constantly, then how is it that a person finds it very difficult to pay attention during a lecture about a topic that they don't particularly like, but they're able to binge watch 4 seasons of The Office without any trouble at all, right? And now you might make the argument, or you might say, well, that's because watching The Office is a passive activity, whereas listening to a lecture and taking notes is an active activity, which is definitely true. But nonetheless, both activities require attention. I guess we could define attention, which my definition of it is essentially where one's consciousness is placed, where one's energy is directed. I would say that's my definition of attention. And so if our attention spans were getting shorter, which would mean that we were unable to force ourselves to pay attention to something, essentially, then, well, we simply wouldn't be able to engage in any activity that requires focus and effort and concentration. And this is obviously not true. People are able to devote a fair bit of time and attention to one particular thing if it's interesting to them, right? And so that's the argument for that. And I'll say too, what Chase proposes instead is that what's actually happening is that our brains are getting better at rapidly identifying what's important to us. Okay? And I believe this to be true, and I've thought it through a fair bit. That's what's really happening, is that our attention spans are not getting shorter. Our brains are simply getting extremely good at identifying within, sometimes a second or a few seconds or a fraction of a second, whether or not something is important to us. And that makes sense if you think about it, because if someone's scrolling on TikTok, for example, which I hate TikTok, by the way, YouTube Shorts, I guess not so bad, but anyway, if someone's scrolling on YouTube Shorts, let's say, and they're scrolling through many different videos, eventually they're going to stop and they're going to watch one of the videos. And the video they're going to watch is going to be the one that is interesting to them. the one that they find meaningful, right? It's in reality, that's what's happening, is that we're becoming really good at, like I said, I feel like I'm repeating myself, quickly identifying, okay, is this piece of content important to me or not? Or does this look interesting or not? So that's really what's happening. Our attention spans are not getting shorter. If they were, then we would not be able to watch an hour-long movie and sit through it. So that's that. Now, next thing I'll talk about is knowledge versus skill. So let's see here. Allow me to gather my thoughts about this. So there's a common preference in people, I suppose, to gain knowledge and facts, to memorize things, as opposed to developing skill and experience. And what Chase talks about is that people can often get addicted to facts, to knowledge. And although knowledge is very useful, ultimately skills, and I do believe this to be true, skills will trump knowledge at the end of the day. Because, and the example Chase gives is, imagine you have two people who are in sales. Which person do you think is going to make more sales? The one who has memorized and studied every single body language technique and who has learned all about the different facial expressions people make whenever they're interested in a product versus when they're not, or the person who has devoted hundreds or thousands of hours to talking to people and developing different strategies to sell a product, and who has extremely good social skills. Well, it's obviously going to be the second person. It's going to be the one who's developed the skills through hundreds or thousands or 10,000 hours that's necessary to make the sale. They're going to be the person who has success and who actually delivers results. And I think this is true for a very simple reason, which is that you have to apply what you learn, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how much information, how much data is stored in your head if you don't apply that. Ultimately, that's, I think, one of the main markers of intelligence, is how well someone is able to apply what they know. Because ultimately, applying what you know is what's going to help you truly learn and get results, as opposed to simply memorizing facts. So, this is something I'm trying to get better at. Translating what I know into an actual skill and trying to develop skills as opposed to simply acquiring knowledge about a subject. Now let's talk about another common misconception in, I suppose, the behavior analyst community, you could say, or maybe perhaps even in the psychology community, which is that there are certain, well, I would actually say this is just common among people these days. There's this common belief that there are certain behaviors or a list of behaviors that a person can display that will tell you with 100% certainty that they're lying. Okay? I'm sure many of you have seen articles on the internet, perhaps even YouTube videos, with titles such as 4 foolproof signs that someone's hiding something, right? But the truth is, there are no behaviors in body language that will tell you without a shadow of a doubt, or beyond a shadow of a doubt, that someone is being deceptive. There are only behaviors, and there certainly are behaviors, plenty of them, that indicate that someone might be being deceptive. Okay? And Chase has developed, I think, what is a pretty ingenious system for reading people called the periodic, it's based on the periodic table, but it's called the behavioral table of elements. And he's given each element a number, and the higher the number, the more likely that that behavior indicates deception. So there's certain behaviors, like one of the most well-researched indicators of deception is facial touching. And let's be more precise here. Specifically, I should say not indicators of deception, but indicators of stress. Okay, one of the most strong indicators, one of the strongest indicators of stress is facial touching, right? And so if someone touches their face, especially repeatedly while you're speaking to them, there's a high probability that they're stressed. Now, it could be something else. I mean, you have to think logically. If it's they have makeup on, or I don't know, they have some sort of condition that makes their skin itch, then you have to take that into account. But typically, it's a good indicator that someone is stressed. Now, compare that to, say, arm crossing, like I'm doing right now. This is another one I've seen before. They'll say that if someone crosses their arms, they're being deceptive, which is not true at all. Now, the research does indicate that we're less receptive. We take in less information when our arms are crossed, and I guess if our legs are crossed as well. But there's no indication that there's nothing that indicates that if someone crosses their arms, they're lying to you. It's just not, that's just not true. What you really want to look for when you're trying to determine whether or not someone's being deceptive is clusters of behaviors. You want to look for multiple indicators of stress. And the more indicators of stress that you can spot, especially if some of them are strong indicators of stress, such as facial touching, the more sure you can be that someone is being deceptive, or that someone is lying. Essentially, the more stress behaviors you can spot, the higher the probability that the person is being deceptive or lying to you. Okay. So anyway, I think I've said enough about that. I don't know how long. That's right. There's no timer on this camera. So I think that covers everything surrounding that topic. Now let's look at the final topic of today's discussion, which is the 4 ways of looking at people. This is possibly maybe the deepest topic that Chase talks about in the book. And there are essentially 4 different ways that people perceive other people. So let's see if I can remember them, actually. The first one is people are broken, I believe. The second one is people are different. I can't remember. The fourth one is people are reasons, but let's see. I'm going to have to pull out the book here. So, yeah, the first one is people are broken. Second one, people are different. The third one is people are facts. And the fourth one is people are reasons. So let's go through them briefly. People who believe that people are broken tend to see, I'm kind of just reading from the book at this point, tend to see the behaviors of others as being screwed up or stupid. And it gives an example of if you're driving. They will get cut off by the guy in the truck and have an emotional response that they feel inclined to alleviate. They want to fix the situation so that they are back on top of the person who cut them off. They might speed up and cut him off to show him he's not powerful, or try to somehow reestablish their power and control. Okay, let's look at the second one. People are different. This group of people will still have a strong emotional reaction to events and negative behaviors from other people. The difference is, even though they may take it personally, they are more likely to decide against taking action to rectify the situation and correct the other person's behavior. Even though they may fantasize about the truck running off the road into a ditch, they aren't going to make it happen. So let's look at the third one, which is people are facts. We can't correct facts. When something happens like a hurricane or a flood, we know internally that we cannot change them. This is the fundamental reason we humans don't get mad at natural disasters. We may get mad at its results or the consequences of something happening, but not the hurricane itself. When something is absolute and unchangeable, we don't get mad. And it makes a point here which I find interesting. One reason we do this is because when we feel anger, it's a secret desire for something to be different. Most times, it's a secret desire to change something. These people view humans as facts, unchangeable and permanent. They don't look at people in a negative way at all. They only default to assuming there's nothing that will change the person. These people are typically much happier in contrast to the previous two because of this. Okay. So now we have the fourth way of perceiving people, which is, I would say, this way is the correct way and also the highest resolution way, I guess you could say. This is the way that is most aligned with reality, I think, which is to view people as reasons. This is the highest level, the level at which a behavior profiler views the world. As the truck swerves in front of them in their car, they slow down safely and increase their distance from the truck. While this happens, their mind automatically defaults to the laws of behavior, in particular the first and fourth law. They see the actions of others as a product of behaviors learned in childhood. Without a negative thought about the other person, they know the behavior is something all humans are capable of. The negative behaviors are all a product of pain, suffering, and childhood experiences that shapes a person into who they are today. So this is the type of perception I try to have in my day-to-day life, though I often don't. I'm sure I often don't. And I really want to spend some time talking about this, though I'm not going to spend too much more time. I really believe that this last way of perceiving people is the correct way, and it will ultimately reveal the truth. Because I do believe it to be true that everyone becomes who they are for a reason, and with patience, a willingness to empathize, and a willingness to critically think, I think a person can come to truly understand the actions of another person, no matter how different that person is from you, if this makes sense. So I really feel like we as humans should strive to see each other in this manner. Because this is, I believe, it's hard to put this into words. Viewing people in this manner is ultimately what will produce positive effects. It's ultimately, I believe, what will allow us to make progress and eliminate suffering, right? Or certainly one of the things that will help eliminate suffering. I truly believe it's true that every single human being is connected to every other human being. You know, there's an idea, not to get like religious or whatever, but there's an idea that all is one. Everything is one. And I believe this, at least in some sense. Now, it's certainly true that humans are different than animals. It's also true that humans are similar to animals, but ultimately when it comes to comparing one human being to another, I think most people are more similar to each other than they are different. And this is especially true if the person you're comparing yourself to is the same gender as you. But even if they're not, I believe that ultimately we are more alike than we think we are. Because ultimately, I believe the fundamental workings of the human mind are virtually the same in every person. And that it's certainly true that genes and DNA contribute to who someone becomes, but it's also true, I think, that culture and environment and the way that someone was raised, especially someone's environment as a child, plays a huge impact on the beliefs they develop and how they view the world and how they view nature and and everything about that person, how their personality develops. So anyway, that's about it for this podcast episode. If you found it meaningful or useful or interesting, or if you just enjoyed listening to it, let me know in the comments, and I'll do more videos like this. Although I already plan on doing that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And I think ultimately the takeaway I got from this book, both times I read it, I would say, is that if a person pays attention and they know the basic body language signs, like the most common ones, they're able to learn a lot about a person from simply observing. And it's also true that by talking to people and by listening to people, truly listening to people to understand, we're able to better comprehend the mind of the person that we're listening to and understand why they are the way they are. And ultimately, I think that leads to unity, if done properly. So anyway, now that's the end of this podcast episode. And let's see, I don't have an outro, so I will see you in episode 4. Thanks for watching or listening or both. Peace.